as if it is an uninterrupted kind of a thing. You know, you can't think of the media in generic terms. There are good media, there are bad media, there are indifferent media. But I don't think even the media there, I come across, I'll tell you what, I find political comment in regional newspapers to be far more interesting sometimes than what I find in the English papers. Serious political analysis, all right? And that is something you've got. So let's not think in generic terms. Media need to be condemned. No, there are good elements in the media, and there are terrible elements in the media. So that is, we've got to guard against basically this factor. And again, all right, celebrity-driven, fine. That is not the choice. You know, Salwa Jom and so on. For example, let me ask you one question to all of you. What do you think is the most important development, news-wise, in the past 24 hours? Can you tell me, you're a political science person, what do you think is the most important one, in political terms?
I think that is a Lokpal bill means as per my consideration.
Well, actually, in the last 24 hours, what has been the news development which in your view is the most significant? One is Sonia Gandhi, one is Lokpal. Well, it is neither one nor the other. It is the fact that the United States economy is in the doldrums.
Yeah, it is going
because
down.
it has lost its AAA status. It has sent shock waves around stock markets across the world. It's going to have a direct impact on everything from fuel prices to food prices, etc. All right. Now, you needed in today's newspapers some analysis to show that this is what, first of all, people don't know what Moody's is. So you've got to explain that. Then what is the meaning of AAA? What is the meaning of double A plus? Why is there this big difference? Right. And in what way is it going to impact economies around the world? Right. Mr. Pranab Mukherjee yesterday said, let's not press the panic button. But the fact is that the Sensex yesterday fell sharply, as it did fall sharply across the world. And we are all going to have to face in our everyday lives the direct impact of that particular development. All right. One newspaper today gave it 6 paragraphs, but there is no explanation. Newspapers and the media are maybe good in reporting what's happening, but they've got to learn that the big challenge is to give the big picture, to give the interpretation, to give the analysis, to recall the background. I think these are jobs which the media will have to learn to do, which they are not doing now. And unfortunately, the net gives you a huge amount of information, but it is not filtered. In a newsroom, you at least have subs and chief subs who go through and filter the news until it reaches the paper. Net doesn't have that system of filterage, and therefore all kinds of horrible things happen on the net. People are misled. Right? So you will still need professional newspapers, professional media outlets generally, and professionals running it. You have newfangled ideas, citizen journalists. Now, citizen journalists, these are amateurs, all right, who don't have the time to study a subject. But because it is pocket, you place it on channels. It's much like you don't want to spend a news gathering. So night after night, you get a bunch of the same 6 people to shout at each other on a subject, because it's much cheaper to do it. It's much more difficult to send out a team to do actual original reporting on what happens. So these are factors to be taken into account. It's not a black and white picture at all.
And also the other thing I've noticed is that we have very outstanding senior journalists who do fantastic political reporting. But now there are less and less editors who like to take the pains to train a young journalist into how political reporting should be done by being a mentor. You know, they're most happy with just giving mundane news that they get from them. And unfortunately, at the local level, the politicians actually have bought the beat reporters, as we call it. You know, those who do political reporting. And that is very brazen and everybody knows about it, so I don't have to say that.
Differentiate with the knowledge-based journalism. The knowledge-based means some information you are getting. It's like Rahul Dravid century, 31st century, 40 centuries. And the journalism of news which affects our society now. For example, if Rahul Dravid does something wrong, and how you differentiate it with, and which you give the more importance to?
I don't differentiate at all. I think, first of all, we've got to be skeptical about this business of knowledge society. Every society has always been knowledge-based. It is on the basis of certain rudimentary knowledge. What has happened is, it is knowledge now that has become center stage. Not because of knowledge per se, but because suddenly in the management jargon, you've got knowledge society, knowledge-based industries, etc. And even that is now being discarded in favor of other newfangled ideas like green economy, green politics, the ecology kind of thing. While you go and do your work, I mean, then you'll be taken as a neta, not as a journalist.
My question answered, sir.
Thank you.
And I just wanted the same thing to come to
I'm
everybody's
so sorry to
notice.
poke my nose again for the answer. No, I believe that this is just a general perception that, even our family members do, why are you doing that story? You'll get threatening calls, you may get killed and this and that. But if you do your work honestly and on the basis of documents and don't do mudslinging on anyone, 90% of the times you can safely do it and tell the truth.
Yeah, I want to ask one question actually, that is about question of ideologies versus issues. I think there is no need of educating anyone what is the ideological value of patriarchy, developmentalism, bohemianism, or even middle class ideologies like good life, beauty, etc. But there is always a need of educating what is the ideologies of feminism, or I mean counter ideologies. So my question is to that, because you have issues, you are seeing issues totally delinked from ideologies, and what is the place of ideologies in the political education of journalist? And इसी से जुड़ा हुआ विनोद दुआ जी से एक सवाल है कि I think मुझे लगता है कि there is a difference in activism in society and activism in media and media as activist. There are three different categories. और मुझे ऐसा लगता है अपने अनुभव से कि जब आज जो प्रोफेशनलिज्म का भी जो पैराडाइम है, जो कि काफी कुछ एक अलग हो गया है पुराने जमाने से, और पहले भी जो एक्टिविस्ट जब मीडिया में आते थे तो मीडिया काफी उससे एनरिच होता था, और ये तो क्या आज भी वो जरूरी नहीं है उस थोड़ा सा उस बैलेंस को फिर से झुकाने के लिए? ये दो सवाल। थैंक यू।
चेक। आपका सवाल इतना लंबा था मैं भूल गया। मैं सिर्फ इतना कहना चाह रहा था, जब मैंने एक्टिविज्म की बात की थी, अगर मुझे एक्टिविस्ट बनना है तो मुझे उसके लिए अपनी संस्था के जरिए एक्टिविस्ट बनना चाहिए। आप भोलेपन में मेरा अखबार खरीदते हुए ये मानते हुए कि आप तो अखबार खरीद रहे हैं और मैं एक कॉज एस्पाउस कर रहा हूं उसमें, क्योंकि मेरा अपना पॉलिटिकल एजेंडा भी है, मेरे अपने पॉलिटिकल एम्बिशन भी है कि मैं बाद में मंत्री बनना चाहता हूं, इसलिए मैं जो कुछ लिखता हूं पूरे पेज पे लिखता हूं और उसको सिर्फ सच कहता हूं। तो ये मैं आपको धोखा दे रहा हूं। पहली बात, अगर मुझे एक्टिविस्ट बनना है तो उसके लिए और मंच है, अगर मुझे राजनीति करनी है तो उसके लिए पॉलिटिकल पार्टियां हैं, मीडिया नहीं है उसका माध्यम मेरे लिए एज प्रैक्टिशनर। मैं सिर्फ इतना कहना चाहता था, नंबर एक। नंबर दो, मैंने जिक्र किया था एमजे अकबर का पहले 1989 में उन्होंने कांग्रेस के टिकट पर बिहार में किशनगंज से चुनाव लड़ने का फैसला किया था। लेकिन उससे पहले, अच्छा उस वक्त वो एडिटर थे, वो टेलीग्राफ नाम के अखबार के, लेकिन उससे पहले उन्होंने अखबार से इस्तीफा दिया और लिखा उसमें कि पॉलिटिक्स करना और मीडिया करना दो अलग अलग बातें हैं, क्योंकि अब मैं पॉलिटिक्स में जा रहा हूं इसलिए मेरा हक नहीं बनता कि मैं मीडिया में रहूं। वो चुनाव जीते, ये दूसरी बात है कि राजीव गांधी चुनाव हारे, ये तीसरी बात है कि वो कांग्रेस के प्रवक्ता बने, चौथी बात है कि वो राजनीति छोड़कर बाहर आ गए और अब वो इंडिया टुडे के एडिटोरियल डायरेक्टर हैं, ठीक है। लेकिन जो बात उन्होंने एक मिसाल दी थी वो यही थी कि अगर आप मीडिया कर रहे हैं तो आप राजनीति मत कीजिए, उसके लिए पॉलिटिकल पार्टी है। अगर आपको राजनीति करनी है तो मीडिया मत कीजिए। ये बीच की जो स्थिति है जहां पर खतरनाक हो जाता है मामला, जैसा दिलीप ने एक संकेत दिया था कि बहुत बड़े जर्नलिस्ट उन्होंने मीडिया में रहते हुए राजनीति की आज एकदम अलग थलग पड़े हुए हैं। तो हर चीज का मेरे हिसाब से मंच अलग है। अगर मुझे, जैसे मैं चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट नहीं हूं या जैसे मैं कथक डांसर नहीं हूं, वैसे ही मैं एक्टिविस्ट भी नहीं हूं। जिस दिन एक्टिविस्ट बनने का फैसला करूंगा मीडिया से नहीं करूंगा, मैं अपनी एनजीओ बनाऊंगा या किसी की एनजीओ में शामिल होऊंगा या किसी ग्रुप के साथ जुड़ूंगा। मेरा यही कहने का मतलब। जी,
This question is being asked with a certain kind of a moral one-upmanship, which I find a bit odd. Consider the conditions under which Lokmanya Tilak and Mahatma Gandhi functioned. India was ruled by colonial power. There was nothing like democracy available to Indians. Censorship was heavy-handed. At that particular point, they were left with no choice but to use every available means of communication to them in order to fight for the causes they believed in. On the other hand, you had establishment newspapers constantly towing the British colonial government's line. My own paper did that before it came into Indian hands. So, you can't compare what happened in the 1900s, 1920s, 1930s with what has been happening in post-independence India. Today, India is a democracy, and in a democracy, there is scope for anyone to say, look, I believe in total prohibition. And you start a whole campaign, you start a newspaper, write a pamphlet, no one bothers, right? This was not possible in the earlier period when you had colonial rule. So you've got to look at the context in which these things operate. Gandhiji knew what the context was. Gandhiji was asked at one point, would you advocate non-violence under the Hitler regime? And of course he didn't enjoy it. Non-violence was possible because the British colonial government had a certain attitude which allowed the practice of non-violence. But Mr. Hitler would not do it. So even Gandhiji knew exactly in what context, what will operate and what will not. Much the same thing holds true for media. That why aren't we doing today what Gandhiji did then? Well, there are lots of people doing today what Gandhiji did. Right? But they're doing it in a very different context. They're doing it, the amount of pluralism that you have in the country, also in the media, that pluralism I think needs to be celebrated. And then you have the choice, you pick and choose, you say, this is the paper I want to read because by and large it corresponds to the way I think you ought to approach public life. And you discard it. I mean, please look at, whether newspapers like, do you know at least the name of the weekly of the CPM? How many students of journalism know? It's called People's Democracy. All right. The same kind of propaganda week after week. Similarly, there's a paper of the RSS called The Organizer. All right. The same thing again and again. Now, they preach to the converted. And even the converted, mind you, get bored listening to the same things again and again. But the fact is that you can't compare the early part of the 21st century to the early part of the 20th century because conditions were very different. People asked me, what did you do during the emergency? I'll tell you what I did. I stopped writing about Indian politics and instead wrote about Argentinian politics. Now you will say, well, why did you choose Argentina? It is because there was a dictatorial woman running Argentina there called Eva Perón. So week after week, I wrote about Eva Perón and how she suppressed the press and how she put political prisoners behind bars and so on and so forth. And after writing about 7 articles, the chief censor called me and said, can you please shift to another country?
Very derogatively to, that we asked them to bend and they crawled.
He didn't say this. It was Vidyachandran Shukla who said this.
Okay, somebody said that.
You were asked to bend, you chose to crawl.
Now, why? You're saying that the media stood up to the emergency.
Well, I'm sorry to say this, but the nation was asked to bend, and the nation by and large crawled. During the 2.5 years of the emergency, I would really like to know how many people courted jail. We have the full figures now. There is enough documentation available on who actually resisted the emergency. I think it came, first of all, as a national shock. No one expected this to happen. And what happened later on? Within less than 20 months, Mrs. Gandhi was forced to call those elections, and Mrs. Gandhi suffered a kind of a rout electorally that no one else. So the nation responded in one way when the emergency was imposed, silently didn't do anything for 20 months. The minute it got the opportunity, it booted out the emergency regime. Right? The media is what the more or less along the same lines. There were those who opposed it furiously. There were those, but there were interesting and humorous stories also about that. Mr. Kuldeep Nair was one of those who went to jail during the emergency. And after that he wrote a book, and the book was called In Jail. It was reviewed in the Hindustan Times by a very fine journalist who died young by the name of Chand Joshi. And the last paragraph I remember of that review, which was a critical review, which says, everyone knows that Mr. Kuldeep Nair began his career in Urdu journalism. But why does he have to prove it in Roman script?
Many times I've been referring to mainstream media. What is the mainstream media? Is that the media which only some few metros and few people in the metros read and watch it, and 80% of India neither reads it nor watches it?
I don't know where you got your figures of 80% from, because my own reading is that the penetration of newspapers, the penetration of television, and especially the penetration of radio has grown in a big way in the past 10 years. So I don't know where that 80% figure comes from. I think it would be closer to say that just about 80% are in fact covered. And in that, I would also include Doordarshan, which has the largest footprint of any medium in the country. All right. So I know where that figure comes from. Where by mainstream we mean all of this. We mean government-owned media. We mean private channels put together. We mean private newspapers. That for us is mainstream. Right. For me, one of the finest journals produced anywhere in the world is produced in India, and that is the Economic and Political Weekly. Not too many people know about it.
No, what I mean is that many times only the English newspapers or the English channels, which are basically based in Mumbai and Delhi, they are called the mainstream media.
No.
And the real regional media is English side.
No, for me, I tell you what, again, context is important. The English-speaking Indian middle-class elite reads English language newspapers and watches English channels. But as I told you earlier, politics is increasingly determined at the level of the state. And there, for example, in Maharashtra, the Marathi papers are far more important than anything that the English papers might write. And likewise, in the Hindi belt, in UP and Bihar, the Hindi papers there are going to be far more important. Tamil, not too many people know that the largest selling newspaper in the country is a Tamil paper. How many of you know that? Followed by a Malayalam newspaper. These are the two. Why? Because they are deeply rooted in the society and politics of their respective states. There, the Times of India or the Indian Express matters only to a tiny elite. It's not the mainstream there. The mainstream is Malayalam Manorama or the Daily Thanti in Tamil Nadu. So the context is important.
Looking forward, now that journalism has become a realm, or rather, media itself is technologically driven, how important, or rather, since you're a senior media persons, how important is it for a young aspiring journalist to have basic technical skills? Like you say, you can use the internet to, have a lot of analysis, compile information, things like that. How do they do that, and how do they learn to do that? Because today when you talk of youngsters using Google or any such search engines, they're just browsing through it. But how would a journalist look at it? And how do you actually acquire these technical skills, which are important today?
I can tell you about the television media. Camera has a language. You have two cameras over there. It has a language of its own. When I'm talking to the camera in a studio, I treat the camera as an extension of the viewer's eye. That is your eye, my viewer's eyes. There is a particular meaning if I go in for a TCU, a tight close-up, from my forehead to my chin. There's a particular meaning if I go for a close-up, leaving some headroom here and cutting here. There's a particular meaning when I go for a mid-shot, mid-long shot, long shot, extreme wide. Similarly, editing has its own language. Like if we use a dissolve as opposed to a cut. Now dissolve means a lapse in space and or time, whereas a cut means continuous time. So as a journalist, if you're familiar with the language of your own tools, it's like as a print media journalist, you're proficient in your language skill. So it's absolutely critical and necessary to know your computer software, news cutter or whatever software you're using for news. Graphics, what can graphics do for you? Audio perspectives, like when a plane goes, you can hear the sound of an aeroplane from a distance, it's less. But as it approaches, it becomes louder, 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 and then it fades out. Same logic applies to shots also. An audio perspective needs to be created. For that you need to understand your machines, your recorders, your mixers. So for an electronic media journalist, those days are gone when everything was left to the camera person or editor that, okay, they will bail us out at the end. Inse bana kar rakho. No. Today's journalists, like my colleagues and elsewhere also, they know how to shoot themselves. They don't, because there are cameramen. They know how to edit. They know how to think of graphics also, what kind of graphics have to go. They know how to write the script which is going to be voiced over. So you need to know you need to have your language skills. You need to know your tools of production, your skill of your medium. It's absolutely necessary today. You cannot lag behind in these matters.
So what I wanted to specify is TV, I understand as a medium, is technically, you need to know the techniques well. But when it comes to newspapers, print journalism as well, what happens is with a lot of, say if you're talking of foreign news reporting or if you're getting some kind of coverage from some glossy magazine. Now, for an Indian audience, someone sitting in US, you need to change the language perhaps. But what happens is when you're doing a particular story, you're just using the same, whatever you compile from the different websites, it's literally the same language. There is no change in the way it's reported also. I'm not talking of news given from news agencies, but I'm talking of compiled news, compiled news articles. Maybe there needs to be that kind of guidance, because today if you look at a lot of the youngsters, like we were just talking about how they just get carried away into page 3 journalism easily. I feel personally it's because they find it so easy to get this information. Number one is because it's easily available on the internet and wherever and things like that. Secondly is the fact that they don't really have to work very hard. What I'm trying to say is if you need to use new media tools on the internet, then perhaps journalists and young journalists need to be taught how to use it effectively, so that they also understand it as a tool, as a way of analysis rather than just compiling news. Like you were saying, the entire U.S. talk, the fact that the U.S. has not, has lost its 3-star status. Now, the way it was reported is just as it was heard on the television news yesterday night, or the way maybe one of the major online newspapers have given it. How does it affect me? I do not know, because the reporters also tend to just take it as a report. So although we are using all these tools, we are not really making an analysis which will help others to understand the gravity of the issue.
Listen, I think there are 3 separate things in what you've been saying.
Maybe, I may have just...
One of them concerns the mechanisms or the tools that need to be mastered in order to do well in the profession. The second pertains to techniques that need to be deployed for your work. All right. I think these obviously they need to be taught. I mean, if you're using Word, you've got to be proficient in using Word. If you want to know how best, you've got to surf the net in order to get what you want. What are the websites that you should be exploring in your own thing? All that obviously needs to be taught and can be learned. My problem is not that. My problem is of a different order. That increasingly in media schools, what is not being taught is grammar. Unless you think well, you can't write well. And you can't write well if you don't know grammar. And the fact that, as it is, we Indians have difficulties with the use of the articles, definite, indefinite article. We're terrible at using tenses. You see, we don't know how to use prepositions, to which in a newsroom, matters have become hugely complicated because we get our news sources in American English, in British English through Reuters, and then we've got Indian English. So in a given story, you will find that in para 1, it is American English. And the Americans drop their prepositions. Right? Obama met Putin Wednesday. That is a typical American sentence. Whereas the English ones will say, Obama met with Putin on Wednesday. So the Yanks drop prepositions. The Brits use prepositions. We use neither. And we bring in Indianisms in the way we do things. For example, many of us who have not been exposed to English since childhood, even later on, think in our own languages unconsciously and then translate it. So I've heard a lot of